but I think they forgot mine. Daddy says sometimes good things just get stuck in the mail.
It's not silly, Mia. What would you build if you had it?
Seattle winter rain drums on the old community center. Adrian, a polished tech CEO with tired eyes, slips in to donate quietly. On the steps, 5-year-old Mia whispers she missed Winter Wish because her dad lost work. His own hungry nights rush back. He orders a handmade robot kit stitched, for Mia, Build Bright. But when he meets her parents, will his gift expose a painful truth or begin to heal it? Seattle rain stitched gray lines across the windshield, soft and steady, the kind of rain that crept into bones. Adrian Cole killed the engine and listened to the patter fade. He adjusted his glasses, checked the time under his cuff, and looked at the low brick building he knew by heart. Maple Ridge Community Center. The paint on the trim had chipped in the exact same place as when he was 12. Back then he came for hot cocoa and homework help. Now he came in an Italian suit, with a check in his pocket and too many questions in his chest. Inside, the air smelled like wet coats and cinnamon. A youth basketball practice thumped on the far court. A wall of photos showed decades of pie sales, toy drives, field trips. His own face was somewhere in the early years, a skinny kid with a backpack too big for his shoulders. He breathed in, slow. He had promised the board he would keep his evening free. He had promised himself he would not stay long. Rosa slid open the glass at the front desk. She had been a volunteer when he was young, then a program manager, then the backbone of the place when budgets got tight. Her eyes warmed when she saw him. Her voice stayed practical. "Adrian, you choosing a night when I can actually say thank you?" He smiled, careful. "I'm dropping something off, quietly." She tilted her head toward the corkboard. Colored tags hung there, raindrop-shaped, each scrawled with a child's winter wish. A soccer ball, a blue coat, a book about planets. He counted the empty thumbtacks, more wishes than donors. It pressed on him like weight. "You look tired," Rosa said, softer now. "The city never sleeps when it is trying to save itself." Adrian took the envelope from his inside pocket. He had folded the check with precision, the way his mother folded grocery lists, edges aligned. "For after school, for the emergency pantry, for whatever keeps the lights warm," he said. "No name on the wall. I mean that." Rosa accepted the envelope with both hands. "You always did." He scanned the lobby again. A bulletin board held flyers. ESL classes this Saturday. Union meeting Tuesday. A notice about the Winter Wish Party. The last flyer was a hand-drawn sheet from a kids' club. Someone had taped a small paper star to it. Yellow construction paper, edges uneven. In shaky handwriting, 2 words ran across the center. "Build Bright." His throat tightened. His mother had whispered those exact words over a cracked stovetop, laying a paper towel over a plate of toast and calling it a feast. Build Bright. It never meant be flashy. It meant find a way. "Remember the talent show where you made a robot out of cereal boxes?" Rosa said, as if she could read him. "You were all elbows and tape, and it fell apart right before the finale." "It wasn't the finale," he said, almost smiling. "It was my beginning." The gym doors swung, letting out a stream of damp air and louder echoes. A toddler in a yellow raincoat toddled past holding a foam ball. Her mother hurried behind. A few teenagers leaned over the water fountain, laughing low. The world outside could define Adrian by his share price and patents. In here, a different ledger counted. Hours given, meals shared, faces remembered. Rosa slid a thin folder toward him, a form donors filled out if they wanted updates. He pushed it back gently. "Anonymous, Rosa. But tell me what you need tonight." She didn't hesitate. "We need rain boots in size small. We need microwave meals that mothers can heat at midnight without waking neighbors. We need work that pays people before it replaces them." She stopped, a shadow of apology crossing her features. "Sorry, it has been a week." He nodded. The words thudding against a truth he wrestled daily. His company had launched pilots to make buildings safer and smarter. Sensors to cut water waste, software to predict elevator failures before they trapped anyone. But progress, if left alone, could turn blunt. He had built tools. Tools had sharp edges. He moved toward the corkboard and eased a loose thumbtack into the frame. The paper star fluttered. He steadied it with a fingertip. "Who wrote this?" he asked, quiet. "Kids Makers Club," Rosa said. "They're wild for robots this year. The toy drive covered most wishes. A few fell through. Happens when hours get cut and phones get shut off." Adrian took off his glasses and dried a corner with his tie. The rain had seeped into everything. "I'll send boots and microwave meals. You'll have them by morning." Rosa studied him. Not impressed by promises, but attentive to the weight of them. "You always show up with something practical," she said. "You never stay for the party." He could not explain why he kept his distance. Maybe gratitude made him ache. Maybe he feared he had become a man who helped from a safe height. He slipped his glasses back on and reached for the lobby door. "Adrian," Rosa said, "whatever storm you're walking through, the door swings both ways." He nodded again, a little grateful and a little undone. Outside, rain stitched new lines across the street. He tucked his hands into his coat and felt the small folded card he kept there, worn soft from years of carrying. His mother's handwriting, 2 words almost faded. "Build bright." He stepped into the night, not knowing that before he reached the car, a small voice would change the direction of everything he thought he understood. The drizzle had thickened into a cold, silver curtain when Adrian stepped outside. The community center's porch light cast a trembling glow onto the wet pavement. He raised his collar and took 2 slow steps down the concrete stairs, then froze. A little girl sat huddled beside the railing, her knees pulled to her chest, her shoes soaked through. She had a paper star pinned to her jacket, the same kind he'd seen on the corkboard inside. Her small voice broke the quiet. "Mister, do you know if the gifts come tomorrow?" Adrian crouched down, his expensive suit brushing the wet concrete. "Which gifts?" he asked gently. "The Winter Wish ones," she said. "Miss Rosa said maybe they were delayed, but I think they forgot mine." Her lower lip trembled, but she tried to smile. There was something brave in the way she blinked away the tears. "It's okay. Daddy says sometimes good things just get stuck in the mail." He noticed her name stitched in faded thread on her backpack. "Mia." Adrian's tone softened. "What did you wish for, Mia?" She shrugged. "Not a toy. I wanted the robot kit from the catalog, the one that says you can build anything. But that's silly, right? Daddy says we can't afford robots when the lights are off half the time." The wind pushed a curl of her dark hair across her cheek. Adrian gently tucked it behind her ear. "It's not silly," he said. "What would you build if you had it?" Her eyes brightened for a second. "A helper robot, so Daddy doesn't have to fix everything alone." Something in Adrian's chest tightened. He remembered his own mother soldering broken appliances with a butter knife, pretending the sparks were fireflies. He remembered standing by, wishing he could build her something to make life easier. He exhaled slowly. "How old are you, Mia?" "5, she said, holding up all her fingers proudly. "Almost 6. We were going to go to the Winter Wish party, but Daddy couldn't. He was tired." "Tired," Adrian repeated. The word landed heavy. He looked at the flickering streetlight, the puddles catching bits of neon from a nearby diner. Behind the glass doors, Rosa was locking up. Inside, warmth and laughter lingered. Out here, there was only rain, and this small child holding on to faith in a delayed miracle. "Where's your dad now?" he asked. She pointed toward the corner where a rusted sedan was parked under the street lamp. A man inside leaned forward, eyes closed, hands resting on the steering wheel. "He's sleeping," Mia said. "He said we can't waste gas for heat, but he'll wake up when I knock. He doesn't know I came back to check." Adrian's throat tightened. "Does your mom work late?" Mia looked down at her soaked shoes. "It's just me and Daddy," she whispered. "Mom went to heaven when I was 2. Daddy says she sends us courage when things break." For a long moment, neither spoke. Rain hissed softly against the asphalt. Adrian straightened, pulling off his coat. He draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. "You keep this until you're warm," he said. Her small fingers clutched the fabric. "But won't you be cold?" He managed a faint smile. "I've been cold before. I know how to wait." She tilted her head, studying him the way children do when trying to decide if someone means what they say. "You talk like Miss Rosa," she murmured. "She says grown-ups forget to hope." He knelt again. "And do you think she's right?" Mia nodded seriously. "Uh-huh. But not you. You came back." He blinked, surprised by how much that simple sentence struck him. He hadn't come back for recognition. He told himself it was just a donation. But now, looking at her tiny form wrapped in his expensive coat, he wasn't so sure. A car horn honked faintly in the distance, muffled by the rain. Adrian looked toward the sedan. "You should go wake your dad, Mia. Tell him someone's keeping an eye on your wish." She frowned. "You mean, you'll tell Santa's helper?" "Something like that," he said. "A winter helper who knows about robots." She smiled wide. The first real smile he'd seen on her face. "Okay, then maybe it's not too late." He watched her run back to the car, her small boots splashing through puddles. The man inside stirred, startled at first, then relieved as Mia climbed into his arms. Adrian couldn't hear their words, only saw her pointing back toward him. Daniel, he'd learned that name later, lifted his hand in a silent thank you. Adrian nodded once and turned away. Back in his car, the rain blurred the windshield into watercolor streaks. He rested his hands on the steering wheel and whispered the words his mother used to say whenever they had nothing but each other. "Build bright, no matter the dark." He didn't know yet that before dawn he'd be calling a craftsman he hadn't spoken to in years, with an unusual commission for one small girl named Mia. Adrian couldn't sleep that night. The sound of rain against the tall windows of his penthouse felt louder than usual, like a reminder that the city below him was still wet, still cold, still struggling. He stood barefoot in his kitchen, a mug of untouched coffee cooling beside his laptop. The city lights shimmered in the distance, refracting through rain streaks. Somewhere down there, a 5-year-old girl named Mia was trying to believe her wish hadn't been forgotten. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small wooden box, the one thing he had kept from his mother's apartment before the building was torn down. Inside were a few mementos: an old bus pass, a brass button from her winter coat, and a yellowed card with her handwriting. "Build bright." He ran his thumb over the fading ink, then reached for his phone. A contact buried deep in his list. R. Mackay Workshop. He hadn't called in almost 10 years. The line picked up after a few rings. "Cole, you realize it's nearly midnight?" "Hey, Rob," Adrian said, his voice low. "I need something special. Custom." "Custom, huh? Last time you said that, we ended up making robotic prosthetics for veterans and nearly broke your budget." "This one's smaller," Adrian said, looking out at the dark skyline. "For a child. A kit, not a finished toy. Something she can build with her hands." "Sounds sentimental. That's new." Adrian smiled faintly. "Engrave it with, for Mia, build bright. Make sure it looks like a late delivery from a winter helper." There was a pause. "You're serious?" "I'll cover the rush cost. Deliver it to Maple Ridge Community Center by 4 p.m. tomorrow." Rob sighed. You never did learn how to sleep. No, Adrian said quietly, but I'm trying to remember how to hope. When he hung up, the silence felt softer. He leaned against the counter, staring at the rain, and whispered to the city, "Let this reach her." The next afternoon, Rosa was sorting donations when she found the parcel: brown paper, hand-tied with silver string, a small tag that read, "A late winter wish from your winter helper." When Mia arrived with her father, shyer this time, Rosa smiled. "I think someone forgot to deliver this to you." Mia's eyes widened. "Me? Really?" She tore the paper open carefully, gasping when she saw the shining metal pieces, small tools, and bright wires neatly arranged. A booklet rested on top. You can build your future. Daniel stood behind her, weary but trying to smile. His clothes were neat but worn, the lines on his face deeper than his 30-something years. "Mia, sweetheart, say thank you." She turned to Rosa. "Thank you, but who's the helper?" Rosa shrugged with a grin. "Some people help best when no one knows their name." Mia touched the engraved plate on the kit, tracing her name with wonder. "For Mia. Build bright," she read aloud, her voice small but proud. Daniel crouched beside her, eyes soft. "That's something, huh? Maybe you'll teach me how to build a robot one day." She nodded eagerly. "It'll help fix things when Daddy's tired." Adrian had watched all of this from the far end of the lobby. He hadn't planned to stay, but when he arrived to drop off the new volunteer grant forms, he caught sight of them through the glass. The way Mia's face lit up, the way Daniel's shoulders loosened, it felt like sunlight cutting through gray water. He slipped back toward the door, unseen, but Rosa caught him. "That was you, wasn't it?" she murmured. Adrian hesitated. "Anonymous means anonymous." She crossed her arms, smiling just enough to soften the words. "You can fool the board, Adrian, not me. That little girl needed to believe in kindness again. You gave her that." He nodded, unsure what to say. As he turned to go, Mia's voice carried across the lobby. "Wait, mister." He froze, caught mid-step. She was holding up the robot kit, her eyes shining. "Did you see my gift? It came from the Winter Helper." He forced a gentle smile. "Looks like someone knew what you needed." "Do you want to see when it's finished?" she asked. He paused, heart tightening in his chest. "I'd like that." She grinned and hurried back to her father, who was still examining the manual. Outside, Adrian walked to his car through the drizzle, his reflection merging with the city's neon glow. For the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him that money couldn't buy. Connection. He didn't know that the next time he saw Mia, her father's name would expose the very wound he'd spent his career ignoring. The rain had thinned to a fine mist the next morning, the kind that smelled like wet metal and cedar. Adrian parked outside the community center again, this time without the anonymity of night. The brick walls looked brighter in daylight, less like a relic and more like a promise that had survived. He carried a folder under his arm, contracts for a new youth STEM grant his company had just approved. It should have felt routine, but since meeting Mia, everything felt sharper, more personal. Inside, the hum of voices filled the air. Parents picking up care packages, volunteers sorting canned food. Through the glass wall of the small workshop, he saw Mia sitting cross-legged on the floor, her little fingers tightening screws on a small robot arm. Daniel, her father, knelt beside her, explaining something softly. Adrian froze. He hadn't realized until now how much the man resembled the faces from his company's internal termination lists. The rows of names made obsolete by an efficiency pilot he'd signed off on 6 months ago. Rosa spotted him in the hallway. "You're early. Didn't expect to see you twice in 2 days." Adrian nodded toward the workshop. "That's Mia's dad, right?" "Yes, she said quietly. Daniel Rivera. He was a maintenance engineer at one of your company's downtown sites. Lost his job when they switched to that new AI predictive system. He's been picking up side work. Odd repairs, small gigs, but the rent's overdue. Still, he volunteers here every week. Adrian felt the blood drain from his face. The air suddenly seemed thinner. "Rosa," he murmured. "Does he know who I am?" "Not yet," she said, folding her arms. "But if you're here to help, tell him before he finds out on his own." Adrian inhaled, steady but conflicted. He had spent years building systems meant to improve lives, but improvement had a cost, and people like Daniel had paid it quietly. He stepped into the workshop. Daniel looked up, cautious but polite. "You must be one of Rosa's friends. Mia said you saw her gift yesterday." Adrian nodded, extending a hand. "Adrian, it's a beautiful build." Mia looked up, grinning. "It moves. Daddy said I'm a real engineer now." "That's true," Adrian said gently. "Looks like your helper robot's almost ready for its first job." Daniel chuckled, his smile faint but warm. "Maybe it can fix our heater before the next storm." They laughed lightly, though the joke had weight. The workshop heater clanked unevenly in the corner. Mia returned to her tools, humming under her breath as she attached the final joint. Adrian took the opportunity. "I remember seeing your name once," he said quietly. "Rivera. You worked at Helios Tower, right?" Daniel froze. "Yeah. How'd you know that?" Adrian's voice softened. "I'm with KindredNet, the firm that developed the automation pilot there." Silence. The small whir of Mia's screwdriver filled the gap. Daniel's expression darkened, realization dawning. "You mean you're that KindredNet, the one that replaced the whole maintenance staff?" Adrian swallowed hard. "It wasn't meant to—" "Didn't mean to what?" Daniel cut in, his tone tight but controlled. "Didn't mean to take food off my kid's table? Didn't mean to make me feel useless overnight?" Mia looked up, confused by the sudden tension. "Daddy?" Daniel forced a smile for her. "It's okay, sweetheart. Keep building." He turned back to Adrian, his voice low. "You've got all the data in the world, Mr. Cole. But do you ever run a floor alone at 3 a.m.? When the heat's out and the roof's leaking? You ever see how many people keep those buildings standing while you're upstairs signing papers?" Adrian met his gaze, shame and sincerity colliding inside him. "I haven't. Not for years." "Then don't say it wasn't meant to happen." The words hit deep, cutting through the layers of polished attachment Adrian had built. He looked at Mia again, at her tiny hands carefully tightening bolts, unaware that the man standing before her had helped dismantle her father's world. He took a breath. "You're right. I didn't see what it cost. I came here because I wanted to help. But I think I've been doing it wrong." Daniel folded his arms, skeptical but silent. "I can't undo what happened," Adrian continued. "But I can make sure no one else has to choose between progress and their paycheck." Daniel stared at him for a long moment. "You really think you can fix a system that's built to replace people like me?" Adrian's reply came quiet but firm. "Maybe not alone, but maybe with people who know how it feels to be left behind." For the first time, Daniel's anger softened into something else, reluctant curiosity. Mia tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, look, it waves." The small robot lifted its jointed arm and gave a jerky but unmistakable wave. Both men laughed, tension cracking open just enough for air to return. Adrian crouched beside her, smiling. "It's perfect, Mia." She beamed. "We're going to call him Bright." Daniel managed a small smile. "Seems fitting." Outside, the rain started again. Softer now. More forgiving. Adrian stood, knowing his next step couldn't be quiet anymore. He would have to face his board, his investors, his past decisions. But as he watched Mia cradle the robot that bore her name, he felt something shift inside him, a conviction he hadn't known he still had. It was time to rebuild, not just for her, but for everyone like her father. By the time Adrian reached his office that evening, Seattle's skyline glowed beneath the rain. The glass tower of Kindred Net rose above it all, sleek, flawless, humming with the very intelligence he had designed to make the city efficient. Yet, for the first time, he saw not innovation, but the people it had quietly erased. He walked through the empty lobby, polished marble reflecting the soft blue light of the logo he'd once been proud of. Kindred Net, building smarter futures. The words hit differently now. They echoed like a promise half kept. His assistant, Elena, met him at the elevator. "You canceled the strategy call," she said. "Is everything all right?" Adrian loosened his tie, his tone even. "Not yet, but it will be." She raised an eyebrow. "That's new." He gave a half smile. "Get me a contact for Human Solutions Labs, the small robotics vendor we used for the Helios pilot, and Rob McKay's prototype invoice. I need every detail." Elena hesitated. "You're reopening the automation audit?" "Rewriting it," he said simply. "From the ground up." That night, Adrian stood alone in the glass-walled boardroom, staring at the city lights smeared by rain. His reflection hovered faintly over the skyline, sharp suit, tired eyes, a man who could buy comfort but not peace. He opened his laptop and began drafting a memo, not to impress shareholders, to confront them. Effective immediately, KindredNet is freezing all AI labor automation pilots pending redesign. A human-first review will be established to evaluate socioeconomic impact and community dependency. Future initiatives must prioritize human inclusion, training, partnership, and transitional employment. He paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. He knew what this would cost him. Investors wanted efficiency, not empathy. The stock could dip. The headlines could sting. But somewhere in South Seattle, a little girl was building a robot to help her dad. And for the first time in years, Adrian cared less about metrics and more about meaning. He hit send. The next morning, he returned to the community center, unannounced, unguarded. Rosa was in the kitchen preparing lunch for the after-school kids when he stepped through the door. "Twice in 1 week," she said, smirking as she wiped her hands on her apron. "You planning to volunteer or buy the place?" "Neither," Adrian said. "I came to apologize." "For what?" "For everything that automation pilot took from this neighborhood." Her expression softened, but she didn't let him off easy. "An apology's a start, but people can't eat promises." He nodded. "Then let's feed them with something real." He unfolded a printed document from his coat pocket, the memo he'd sent the night before. "I'm freezing all our pilots. We're building something new, a program where tech works with people, not instead of them. Retraining, guaranteed transition jobs, and funding for small community labs like this one." Rosa scanned the paper, her brow furrowing. "You're serious?" "I'm done pretending progress is progress when it leaves people hungry," he said. "I want Daniel involved. He understands what the ground floor looks like. And Mia, she's proof that we still have hope worth investing in." Rosa smiled faintly. "You're quoting my job posters now?" He laughed softly. "Guess you finally rubbed off on me." She studied him for a long moment, her tone turning gentle. "Adrian, you've done a lot for this place over the years, but this could change things for good." He nodded. "That's the idea." That afternoon, Adrian drove across the city to Daniel's small apartment complex. The building leaned slightly under years of rain, but the sound of laughter filtered through the cracked windows. Mia's voice. When Daniel opened the door, surprise flashed across his face. "Mr. Cole," he said stiffly, Wasn't expecting. Just Adrian, he interrupted. I wanted to show you something. He handed Daniel a copy of the new proposal. We're halting the automation rollout, and I need someone who's lived its fallout to help design the fix. Someone who understands both the wrench and the code. Daniel scanned the document, disbelief shading into cautious respect. You'd trust me with that? Adrian's voice was steady. You built this city's systems long before my AI touched them. I trust people who've done real work. For a long time, Daniel said nothing. Then, quietly, You know this won't make the shareholders happy. Adrian smiled wryly. Progress rarely does. Mia appeared behind her father, clutching her little robot. Daddy, look, Bright can wave and blink now. Adrian crouched down. That's incredible, Mia. She beamed. He's learning, just like Daddy says people do. Her words struck deeper than she could know. Adrian met Daniel's eyes again. Help me build a system where that's true. Daniel looked at his daughter, then at the man who had once been a name on a contract. Finally, he extended his hand. All right, let's try. Adrian shook it, firm and grateful. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering across the wet streets. It felt like the city had just taken its first deep breath in years. 2 weeks later, the storm Adrian had been dreading finally arrived. Not the kind that soaked Seattle's streets, but the kind that lived inside conference rooms lined with glass and money. He stood at the head of KindredNet's executive table. A sleek white folder in front of him labeled Human First Tech Pledge. Around him sat 10 board members, each worth more than most neighborhoods, each staring at him with varying degrees of confusion and alarm. Let me get this straight, said Malcolm Hines, the CFO. You're proposing we suspend all automation pilots indefinitely. Do you understand what that'll do to our quarterly projections? I do, Adrian said calmly, his fingers steepled. And I'm prepared for it. Another voice, sharp, female, unflinching, cut in. Prepared to tank our stock, said Lydia Tran, head of operations. You're asking investors to support a program that gives laid-off workers salaries and retraining on our dime. That's not innovation, it's charity. Adrian's piercing blue eyes lifted from the document. No, he said evenly, it's insurance for humanity. A stunned silence followed. The rain outside the floor-to-ceiling windows traced silver lines down the glass. Adrian let the quiet stretch. When we automated janitorial systems, he continued, we saved $9 million, but we displaced 90 families. Some of those parents still live within walking distance of this building. One of them built my first office chair 10 years ago. Another's daughter, 5 years old, believes machines can help people. She deserves to be right. Malcolm leaned back. Adrian, we can't be sentimental. The market rewards efficiency, not moral philosophy. Adrian's jaw tightened. Efficiency isn't moral if it comes at the cost of dignity. We built KindredNet to make life better for people. Somewhere along the way, we started making it better for machines. Lydia exhaled sharply, flipping through the printed proposal. And this, Human First Tech Pledge. You think the public will care about the fine print? They'll care about proof, Adrian said, and we're going to give it to them. He pressed a button on the presentation remote. The screen behind him lit up with a slide titled North Star Commons. An image appeared, a blueprint of an old warehouse on 7th Avenue near the waterfront. We'll convert this into a multi-purpose hub, Adrian explained, a community kitchen led by local volunteers, a kids' makerspace, childcare facilities for working parents, and, most importantly, a human plus robotics lab for training displaced workers to oversee the very systems that replaced them. A murmur rippled around the table. Daniel Rivera, former maintenance engineer, will lead the lab, Adrian said. He's already designed a pilot curriculum, hands-on mechanical work integrated with AI oversight. It's a first-of-its-kind retraining bridge. Malcolm frowned. You're giving a former employee, one we laid off, the keys to our future tech? I'm giving him a seat at the table we took away, Adrian replied, and I'm investing in loyalty money can't buy. Another director muttered, Our investors won't see it that way. They will, Adrian said, his tone soft but resolute. Because we'll show them a new definition of success, profit that doesn't come from subtraction. The room fell quiet again. Rain thudded harder against the glass. Adrian let the sound fill the silence. Finally, Lydia spoke, voice low but measured. You're risking your position for this, Adrian. If it fails, then I fail for something worth building, he said. That evening, Adrian returned to the community center, still wearing the same suit, his tie loosened, his energy drained but focused. Daniel was there, surrounded by a few volunteers, measuring old tables and sorting through donated equipment. Mia sat nearby, coloring with other kids, her little robot Bright propped beside her, now with mismatched eyes and a smile drawn on its face in marker. You actually got them to agree? Daniel asked when Adrian approached. Not fully, Adrian admitted, but they didn't stop me either. I bought the building this afternoon. It's ours to rebuild. Daniel let out a slow whistle. You just turned a warehouse into hope. Not yet, Adrian said. We'll need to prove this can work. Retraining modules, safety partnerships, funding. I'll bring the tech and capital, but you'll lead the design. Daniel blinked. Me? You've been fixing systems your whole life, Adrian said. Now you'll be building one that fixes people's futures. Daniel shook his head slowly, smiling despite himself. You really are serious about this? I am, Adrian said, then added softly, I owe it to you. And to her. They both glanced toward Mia, who was now showing another child how to connect wires to her robot. Her laughter echoed through the wide room like sunlight breaking through gray. Daniel looked back at Adrian. You know, she thinks you're the winter helper. Adrian chuckled, his voice catching slightly. Then I guess I'd better live up to the story. Later that night, as Adrian drove home through rain-slick streets, he passed the old warehouse for the first time. The lights from the surrounding buildings shimmered on the puddles pooling along the sidewalk. He parked and stepped out, staring up at the weathered brick and faded signage. He could almost see it already. Children tinkering at benches, parents learning new tools, machines humming under human hands. He whispered to the empty air, Let's build bright again. The rain softened, almost as if in agreement. The rain had eased to a steady whisper by the time Adrian pulled up in front of the warehouse again, this time in daylight. A week had passed since the board meeting. The building still looked forgotten. Faded red bricks, rust-streaked windows, ivy creeping up the sides like time itself had decided to claim it. Daniel stood at the entrance wearing a worn leather jacket, blueprints tucked under one arm. His hands were stained with grease and his smile, though small, was real. Didn't think I'd see the day a CEO showed up before sunrise, Daniel said. Adrian returned the smile, carrying a folder of permits and site plans. Didn't think I'd see the day a maintenance engineer would make me nervous. Daniel chuckled. Guess we're both rebuilding something. They stepped inside. The space smelled like dust, oil, and possibility. Light filtered through high windows, illuminating the skeleton of what would soon become North Star Commons. Adrian walked slowly across the concrete floor, his polished shoes leaving faint imprints in the dust. He pictured it, a long table for the community kitchen, rows of workbenches for kids, tool racks lining the walls, screens displaying open-source robotics modules. A place where progress didn't exclude people. It employed them. First step, Daniel said, unrolling his blueprints on a wooden spool table. We fix the structure, reinforce the east wall, add proper insulation. Then I want a learning zone here. He pointed to a section near the back. Makerspace for kids, supervised by parents. People learn faster when their kids do, too. Adrian nodded. And the human plus robotics lab? Daniel tapped another corner of the blueprint. Here, we'll start with small-scale systems. Maintenance drones, predictive sensors, the kind that keep buildings efficient. Only this time, the people who used to get replaced will train to monitor them. Adrian smiled. You're a better systems thinker than half my engineers. Daniel shrugged. Survival's a kind of engineering. They both laughed quietly. A few minutes later, Mia ran in through the open doors, her rain boots splashing through a shallow puddle. She wore her tiny backpack and carried Bright, the robot, proudly in her arms. Daddy, look, Bright still works, she said. He waved at the bus driver. Daniel crouched, grinning. He better have said thank you, too. Mia turned to Adrian. Hi, Mr. Helper. Daddy says you build big robots that help buildings breathe. Adrian knelt beside her. Something like that, he said with a smile. But you're the real builder here. Think you'll help us decorate when it's ready? Her eyes went wide. Really? I can paint the walls? You can design the logo, he said. Every project needs a heart, right? Mia nodded solemnly. Then I'll draw stars. Because when it's dark, that's when people need light the most. Adrian blinked. He hadn't expected to feel so much warmth from a 5-year-old's logic. That's perfect, Mia. Daniel's gaze softened as he watched them. For the first time in months, his daughter looked genuinely happy. Safe, hopeful. Rosa arrived shortly after, carrying 2 thermoses of coffee and a stack of papers. If you boys are going to build a future, she said, you'll need caffeine and city permits in equal measure. Adrian accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. You're joining us officially? Rosa grinned. Someone has to keep you visionaries grounded. I'll run the kitchen and community side. You two handle the machines and miracles. By late afternoon, the space was buzzing with life. Volunteers from the community center arrived, cleaning, sweeping, sanding wood. Adrian rolled up his sleeves, something his staff at KindredNet had likely never seen, and joined them. His hands grew dirty, his shoes scuffed, and for once he didn't care. Daniel climbed a ladder to rewire a light fixture. You sure you know what you're doing down there, boss? He called. Adrian grinned. Nope, but I'm learning from the best. Mia clapped from below. Team Bright is winning. Laughter echoed through the building, and for a fleeting second Adrian felt like he was part of something greater than all his years in the boardroom combined. Later that evening, the last of the volunteers left. The warehouse was quiet except for the soft hum of newly installed lights. Daniel leaned against the work table, wiping sweat from his forehead. You know, he said, if you'd told me a month ago that I'd be running a lab inside a building you bought, I'd have laughed you right back into your fancy car. Adrian chuckled. If you'd told me I'd find hope in a broken HVAC technician and his daughter, I'd have said you were out of your mind. They both smiled, the kind that comes after exhaustion and truth. Daniel looked around the space. This place, it's going to give people their pride back. Adrian nodded. And maybe their purpose. Outside, the street lamps flickered on. Rain tapped gently against the roof, steady and rhythmic. Mia had fallen asleep on a pile of blankets, Bright resting beside her, its tiny LED still blinking faintly, like a heartbeat. Adrian watched her, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years. It wasn't just gratitude or guilt, it was belonging. He turned to Daniel quietly. You said earlier we're both rebuilding something. You were right. I think I'm trying to remember who I was before I became this. Daniel smiled faintly. Then maybe we both needed the same thing, a reason to believe again. They stood there in silence for a while, the city's glow spilling through the windows, washing over the half-finished benches and tangled cords. The space was still raw, unfinished, imperfect, but it was alive. North Star Commons was no longer just a plan on paper. It was becoming a heartbeat in the rain. The rain returned in full the next morning, drumming against the warehouse roof like a restless symphony. Inside, Adrian stood by the new steel-framed windows, watching the mist swallow the skyline. He'd been up since dawn, phone buzzing with board messages and investor alerts. The Human First Tech pledge had gone public overnight, and the reaction was anything but calm. A dozen articles questioned his sanity. One headline read, "KindredNet CEO undercuts his own profit model." Another, "Has Adrian Cole lost faith in AI?" He scrolled through the flood of reactions, some hopeful, others furious. Then he saw the text from Malcolm, his CFO. "We need to talk. Investors are threatening to pull 40 min. Call me now." Adrian exhaled slowly and typed back, "At the Commons. Come see what we're building before you judge it." He slid his phone into his coat pocket just as Daniel entered from the back corridor, carrying a box of small tools and wire spools. "Morning, boss," Daniel said, still getting used to the title reversal. "I saw the news. You really went all in." Adrian half smiled. "Seems like it." "You okay?" He nodded, though the truth was heavier. "Not sure yet, but I'd rather be here than defending myself in a boardroom." Daniel set the box down. "Then you're where you belong." By mid-morning, the warehouse filled with movement, volunteers setting up workstations, Rosa coordinating meal deliveries, a few former KindredNet employees unpacking robotics kits for training. The hum of drills and soft laughter blended with the rain's steady percussion. Mia wandered among the grown-ups, wearing a makeshift badge that read, "Assistant Builder." Bright, the robot, sat beside her, patched with tape and stickers. When Malcolm arrived, his black umbrella dripping, he looked wildly out of place. Italian shoes splashing through puddles, tie askew, eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. "This is where our $40 million is going?" he said, glancing around. "An after-school field trip for laid-off workers?" Daniel crossed his arms. "They're not laid off anymore. They're trainees, future supervisors." Malcolm gave him a skeptical look. "And you are?" "Daniel Rivera, head of the Human Plus Robotics Lab," Adrian said, stepping between them. "The man who used to fix what our algorithms broke." Malcolm scoffed. "You can't be serious." "I've never been clearer," Adrian said. "Come on, I'll show you something." He led Malcolm to one of the work tables. A middle-aged woman in overalls was guiding a small drone through a simple obstacle course of wooden hoops. Her hands were steady, her face focused. "This is Leanne," Adrian said. "She worked maintenance for 30 years before we automated her job. Today, she's learning system diagnostics for our predictive safety bots. By next month, she'll be one of the trainers for our next pilot." Malcolm frowned but watched as Leanne guided the drone safely through a final hoop. It landed neatly on the table, blinking green. Leanne turned, smiling. "I used to clean those vents by hand. Now I program something that does it with me, not instead of me." Adrian let the silence hang. The sound of the rain softened, replaced by the low whir of hope in motion. Finally, Malcolm cleared his throat. "Even if this works, you'll still take a hit this quarter." "Maybe," Adrian said. "But what if, for once, we lead with conscience instead of compliance? What if that becomes our brand?" Malcolm looked at him long and hard. "You've changed." "Maybe I finally caught up," Adrian replied. Later that day, Rosa gathered everyone for lunch. The community kitchen smelled of chili and fresh bread. Volunteers sat side by side with engineers and custodians, sharing stories that sounded more like confessions than small talk, about layoffs, lost pride, second chances. Adrian sat across from Daniel, listening. "You know what's wild?" Daniel said between bites. "I used to hate KindredNet, thought it was just another machine factory. But now I'm here, teaching people to understand those same machines, and it feels different." "That's because you're part of the story now," Adrian said quietly. "You're writing the next chapter." Mia tugged on Adrian's sleeve. "Mr. Helper, guess what?" He smiled. "What?" "I taught Bright to blink twice when it's happy." Adrian grinned. "And how do you know it's happy?" "Because it's helping people," she said simply. Her words made Daniel chuckle. "Looks like she gets that from you." "No," Adrian said, shaking his head. "She gets it from her dad." That night, when the others had gone home, Adrian lingered by the big glass window. The warehouse glowed warm from within. New lights, new laughter. For once, progress looked human. He picked up his phone again. Another message had come in, this time from an unfamiliar number. Saw the news. North Star Commons is exactly what this city needs. Count on union support. He read it twice, then exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. For the first time since the announcement, someone besides his team believed in it. Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle. Across the floor, Mia's robot still blinked faintly, a little patch of light in the dark. Adrian whispered to himself, "Build bright, kiddo. You really are." He didn't know that by morning, word would spread across the city. Workers, journalists, and families coming to see what this quiet CEO had dared to build in the rain. By dawn, the story had already made its way through Seattle. News vans idled outside the old warehouse, their antennas poking through the mist like silver reeds. Headlines flashed across morning broadcasts. Tech CEO turns warehouse into human-robot learning hub. Reporters stood in the rain, umbrellas shaking, trying to peek through the newly installed glass. Inside, Adrian looked anything but the poised CEO from magazine covers. His tailored suit jacket hung on a chair. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows as he helped Rosa line tables with trays of donated pastries. Rosa smirked. "You know, Adrian, there's something poetic about watching the city's most polished man buttering bagels for volunteers." He laughed quietly. "I've handled harder crowds than reporters." She nodded toward the door. "You're about to handle both." Daniel appeared beside them, clipboard in hand, wearing his new lab badge. Director, Human Plus Robotics Training. "We've got 30 sign-ups for today's tour," he said. "Half are curious. The other half think you're out of your mind." Adrian smiled. "That's usually how change begins." Mia ran in, her pink rain boots squeaking. She held up a new drawing, a cluster of stars and small robots holding hands. "Look, Mr. Helper, it's us. Daddy says we're all part of the same sky now." He crouched to her level, studying the bright crayon lines. "That's perfect, Mia. Can we use this for the logo?" Her eyes widened. "Really? Really?" he said. "North Star Commons could use a designer." Mia grinned so hard she nearly dropped Bright, the little robot now upgraded with an LED star on its chest. By mid-morning, the warehouse buzzed with visitors. Former KindredNet employees, local journalists, small business owners, all curious, some skeptical. Adrian stood at the front, microphone in hand. Behind him, a banner stretched across the newly painted wall. AI that keeps people at the center. "Thank you for being here," he began. "I built KindredNet to make life safer and smarter, but somewhere along the way I forgot the one thing machines can't replace, the meaning of work itself. This place, North Star Commons, is our chance to fix that." He gestured toward Daniel and Rosa. We're building something that pairs technology with humanity. Every displaced worker here will receive paid training, job guarantees, and pathways to leadership. When a machine learns, a person should too. The room went still. The only sound was rain sliding down the tall windows. A journalist raised her hand. "Mr. Cole, is this a PR stunt? Some kind of redemption campaign?" Adrian met her gaze without flinching. "No, it's responsibility. And responsibility isn't a headline. It's a practice." Daniel stepped forward. "He's right. I used to fix the systems that broke down. Now I help build ones that won't leave people behind. We're not asking for sympathy. We're proving that progress and people can work side by side." Applause rose, tentative at first, then growing steady. After the press left, the work resumed. Trainees gathered around workbenches, assembling sensors and calibrating bots. Rosa organized a food drive in the next room. The smell of baked bread drifted through the air. Adrian stood near the entrance, watching Mia show off her robot to a pair of high school students. She was explaining how Bright's sensors could detect light and wave when the room feels lonely. Daniel joined him, arms folded, smiling. "She's taken over your PR department." "I'd hire her if I could afford her rate," Adrian said. Daniel laughed. Then his expression grew more serious. "You did something big here, Adrian. But it's not just for show. These people are starting to believe again. In themselves. In the future." Adrian nodded slowly. "And maybe in me, too. That's the part I didn't expect." "Believe it," Daniel said quietly. "Sometimes the hardest rebuild starts inside." The words stayed with Adrian long after Daniel walked off to check on the trainees. That evening, as the volunteers cleaned up, Adrian noticed a small crowd forming outside the gate. They weren't reporters this time. They were workers from nearby buildings, some carrying thermoses, others holding handwritten notes. A woman stepped forward, her jacket faded, her eyes tired but kind. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I used to clean offices for your company. When they switched to smart vacuums, I lost my job. But I read about what you're doing here. Do you think there's room for someone like me?" Adrian smiled gently. "There's room for everyone who wants to learn. Come by tomorrow morning. We'll get you started." Her eyes shimmered. "Thank you. I didn't think people like you even saw us." "I didn't," he admitted softly. "But I do now." She nodded and stepped back, tears mixing with the rain. As the crowd dispersed, Mia tugged at his coat. "You made her happy." "Mr. Helper?" He smiled down at her. "No, Mia." "We did." She tilted her head. "Does that mean you're part of our family now?" The question caught him off guard. He hesitated, his throat tightening. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Maybe I've been trying to be. For a long time." That night, after everyone left, Adrian stayed behind. He walked through the dim warehouse, past the half-assembled drones and stacked toolboxes, until he reached the banner again. The lights reflected off the painted letters. AI that keeps people at the center. He reached out, touching the fresh paint with his fingertips. It felt real. Not an announcement, not an idea, but something alive. Outside, the rain had stopped. The night was still, the air crisp and clean. And somewhere deep inside, Adrian realized the storm he'd been living under wasn't weather. It was guilt. And finally, it had begun to clear. The next week brought what every new movement eventually faces: headwinds. By Monday morning, Adrian's inbox overflowed with warnings and veiled threats. Investor representatives wanted answers. A hedge fund had filed an official inquiry about fiduciary risk. Even a few of his own board allies grew nervous. At 9 a.m., a crisis call was scheduled. By 9 to 10, it sounded less like a meeting and more like a trial. Adrian, you've created a media storm. Malcolm's voice barked through the speaker. Half our shareholders are demanding an explanation. They think you're turning KindredNet into a charity. Across the table in the warehouse's small office, Daniel and Rosa listened quietly. Adrian leaned forward. Elbows on his knees, voice calm but firm. We're not giving anything away. We're reinvesting in the people who built this company. You don't stabilize a future by abandoning the present. Another voice joined. Lydia Tran from operations, crisp and cold. Your human first tech pledge froze our most profitable division. Wall Street doesn't understand moral experiments, Adrian. They understand quarterly gains. Adrian looked out through the glass toward the commons floor. Workers moved between stations, some older, some young, all engaged. What we're building here is a gain, he said. Not everything that matters shows up in next quarter's metrics. Tell that to the pension funds calling for your resignation, Lydia snapped. The room fell silent. Even the rain paused. Rosa broke it gently. If they're angry, it means you touched something real. Adrian smiled faintly. Maybe too real. By noon, Adrian had left the warehouse for a downtown meeting with the city council's labor committee. He walked through puddled streets without an umbrella, dark hair plastered against his forehead. Cameras followed him. Some reporters shouted questions. Are you stepping down? Is North Star Commons a publicity stunt? He didn't answer. He had decided weeks ago that action would be his only statement. Inside the council chamber, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled of wet coats and coffee. Councilwoman Janine Alvarez, an old community advocate with sharp eyes, waved him over. Cole, she said, never thought I'd see the day a CEO sat in this room without lawyers. Adrian smiled faintly. Guess I wanted to see what accountability looks like up close. She studied him for a long moment. People out there don't trust suits, but they do trust second chances. You really going to make this permanent? He nodded. North Star is just the first site. I plan to replicate the model across every region where KindredNet operates, but we need city support, permits, grants, maybe even partnerships with local schools. Janine leaned back. You're talking about social infrastructure, not software. Exactly, he said. Technology should serve the public, not just the powerful. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she smiled. You might actually mean it. Let's talk about how to make it last. By the time Adrian returned to the warehouse, night had fallen. The place glowed warm against the damp Seattle dark. Rosa was closing the kitchen, wiping counters that still smelled like baked bread. Daniel stood by the work tables, reviewing checklists. Mia was sitting cross-legged on the floor with two other children, her robot Bright rolling in small circles. They had built a little maze out of cardboard boxes. He made it through without bumping even once, she shouted. Daniel laughed, clapping softly. See? Told you she'd outgrow us all. When Adrian entered, Mia ran to him, proudly holding the robot up. Bright's learning to listen. Adrian crouched, smiling. He's learning from a good teacher. Rosa approached, drying her hands. You look like you fought a storm and won. More like survived one, Adrian said. But we got a tentative partnership with the city. Workforce grants, shared resources. They believe in what we're doing. That's something, Daniel said, but you don't look relieved. Adrian hesitated. Investors are threatening to pull major funding. If they do, we'll be short on capital within 6 months. Daniel frowned. So, what now? Adrian looked around the bustling space, at the people repairing, learning, laughing. We build anyway. The right things always start broke. Rosa's voice softened. You think they'll walk away from you? He shook his head slowly. Maybe from me, but not from this. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. A local journalist named Tara Yu released a short feature on North Star Commons. The video showed Daniel teaching workers to code, Rosa serving food to volunteers, and Mia handing Bright to a boy with cerebral palsy so he could try the controls. Within 24 hours, the clip went viral. The headline read, "When a machine learns to serve people again." Donations began to pour in. Crowdfunding, small business sponsors, even a few anonymous corporate pledges. One comment under the video simply said, "This is the kind of AI I want my daughter to grow up with." Adrian read it late that night at his desk, the glow of the screen reflecting off his glasses. For once, the storm of criticism had been drowned out by something louder: belief. He picked up the worn card from his mother, the one with those 2 faded words. Build bright. And for the first time in years, he realized it wasn't just a reminder. It was a direction. He looked out toward the warehouse floor where Daniel and Rosa were still working late and whispered to himself, "We're not just rebuilding jobs, we're rebuilding faith." Outside, the rain began again, soft, rhythmic, alive, like the sound of progress finally breathing with a heartbeat. The following weeks transformed North Star Commons into something no one, least of all Adrian, could have fully predicted. What had started as a quiet experiment had grown into a full-fledged movement. Former custodians now wore name badges that read AI Systems Steward. And the pride in their faces was unmistakable. They were the new guardians of the technology that once replaced them, supervising, calibrating, and teaching others to do the same. Adrian stood near the main lab one rainy afternoon, watching as Leanne, the former janitor who'd once flown a drone through hoops, now led a team of trainees. Her calm voice echoed through the room. "Remember, your job isn't to trust the algorithm, it's to question it. The machines predict, but you decide." The group nodded, typing commands into tablets. Screens glowed in soft hues of blue and green, displaying safety data from nearby schools, the first pilot sites. Daniel walked up beside Adrian, wiping his hands on a rag. 3 months ago, I didn't think any of this would work, he admitted. Now they're sending us test data from 10 schools, and the kids love it. They call our stewards the robot whisperers. Adrian chuckled softly. That might be the best job title I've ever heard. He looked across the lab. The hum of machinery, the chatter of workers, the energy. It wasn't corporate, it was alive. This wasn't about profit margins, it was about participation. "Do you remember when I told you I'd help fix what my company broke?" Adrian asked. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, I thought you were just being noble." "Turns out," Adrian said quietly, "it was selfish. I needed to remember why I started all this in the first place." Daniel smiled. "Looks like you found it." By late afternoon, the Commons hosted a new kind of noise: music, laughter, the clatter of trays from Rosa's kitchen. The smell of stew filled the air. Families came in from the rain, sitting at the long tables, eating, talking, helping their children with small robotics kits. Mia sat at the center of it all, showing 2 younger kids how to make Bright follow a line drawn on the floor. "If you believe it can, it will," she told them proudly. Rosa placed a steaming bowl of soup in front of Adrian. "You know," she said, "the kitchen feeds anyone who comes in now. No questions asked. Yesterday, a single dad from Rainier Valley came in with his son. Said the food here tasted like hope." Adrian smiled softly. "Hope's the one thing I don't mind giving away for free." She studied him for a long moment. "You've changed, Adrian. Not in the way most people do when they get richer, but in the way people do when they finally remember they're human." He looked around at the scene. Daniel adjusting a sensor panel, Mia's laughter ringing out, Rosa wiping her hands with quiet pride, and nodded. I think I needed to earn my humanity back. That evening, as the rain eased, Adrian joined Daniel and Mia outside under the covered walkway. The city glowed faintly in the distance, and puddles shimmered beneath the streetlights. "Daddy says the robots at the schools are behaving better now," Mia said between sips of hot chocolate. "No more silly alarms." "That's because your dad taught them well," Adrian said, smiling, "and because people are watching over them again." Mia tilted her head. "So, people and robots are friends now?" "Something like that," he said. "But friends don't replace each other. They help each other do more good." Mia nodded, thinking deeply, then looked up at him. "You talk like my dad, Mr. Helper. He says the world broke because people stopped helping." Daniel chuckled. "You've got quite the philosopher here." "Don't look at me," Adrian said. "She's the one teaching me now." The next day brought a milestone. A report from the city arrived. Re-employment among displaced maintenance workers had reached 90%. A line item at the bottom read, "Projected full reinstatement within 6 months." Adrian read it twice, stunned. He walked out into the commons where everyone was gathered for the afternoon session. "Everyone," he called out, raising the paper. "We did it. 90% re-employed." A stunned silence, then applause, loud, genuine, echoing off the warehouse walls. Daniel clapped him on the shoulder. "You realize this is history, right?" Adrian smiled. "It's a start." Rosa wiped a tear from her eye. "I hope your board sees this." "They will," he said. "But even if they don't, Seattle will, and maybe other cities too." Mia ran up, hugging his leg. "Does that mean Bright gets to be famous?" Adrian laughed. "I think Bright already is." She grinned. "Then can we have pancakes on Sunday to celebrate?" He blinked, caught off guard. "Pancakes?" "Daddy makes the best ones," she said confidently. "You should come." Daniel smiled, half amused, half uncertain. "You don't have to." "I'd like that," Adrian said before he could finish. "If you're sure." Mia nodded with solemn authority. "It's decided then." Sunday morning came quiet and gray. The smell of coffee and maple syrup filled Daniel's small kitchen. Adrian sat at the table, sleeves rolled up, laughing as Mia handed him a misshapen pancake shaped vaguely like a star. "It's for North Star Commons," she explained proudly. He smiled. "It's perfect." Daniel flipped another on the skillet. "Never thought I'd see a CEO at my breakfast table." Adrian chuckled. "Guess I finally found one worth showing up for." They ate together. No cameras, no contracts, no roles to perform. Just 3 people and a robot with blinking lights, sharing warmth against a rainy Seattle morning. For the first time in years, Adrian didn't feel like he was saving anyone. He just felt like he'd come home. The rain held off that morning, as if Seattle itself had paused to breathe. North Star Commons glowed under soft daylight streaming through its tall windows. Rows of banners hung across the rafters, painted by children, stitched by volunteers. Words like rebuild, belong, and together swayed in the gentle draft. Today was the grand opening, not of a lab or a project, but of a movement. Adrian adjusted his tie in the reflection of a steel column. He still wore the Italian suit, but now it bore a faint scuff on one sleeve, a smudge of paint on the cuff. He didn't mind. The imperfection felt honest. Daniel approached, wearing his new North Star badge clipped proudly to his jacket. "You ready?" he asked. "Not sure," Adrian said. "Every other time I've done this, there were reporters waiting to tear the company apart. Today, it feels like they might actually be rooting for us." Daniel smiled. "Maybe because this time you're building something that matters more than the logo." Adrian nodded, glancing toward the small stage set near the front. Rows of folding chairs filled with workers, families, and children. City officials sat in the front row, including Councilwoman Alvarez. Rosa arranged trays of food near the back, pausing every few seconds to wave at someone. And then there was Mia, standing in front of a microphone half her height, clutching her little robot Bright like a co-host. Adrian's throat tightened at the sight. He had written speeches before, dozens of them. None of them ever mattered as much as the one she was about to give. When Rosa tapped the mic, the chatter softened. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and families," she began, "thank you for being here. Today we're not celebrating machines, or money, or milestones. We're celebrating people, ordinary people who refused to give up when the world moved too fast." Applause rose, steady and warm. Rosa stepped aside. "Now, we thought we'd start with someone whose heart built this place long before any of us realized it. Mia Rivera." The crowd cheered softly as Mia climbed onto a small stool to reach the microphone. Adrian watched Daniel's face soften with pride, eyes glistening as his daughter cleared her throat. "My name's Mia," she began, voice trembling but bright. "And this is Bright. We made him here with everyone's help. My daddy says robots are good helpers when people teach them to be kind. So that's what this place is for, to make helpers that help everyone." The audience laughed gently, clapping. Mia smiled wider. "Sometimes people think machines are smarter," she said, holding Bright's small metal hand. "But Daddy says people have hearts, and hearts make good choices. So this is a place where hearts and robots can work together." The room filled with applause, thunderous, genuine, overflowing with emotion. Even Councilwoman Alvarez dabbed at her eyes. Daniel walked up beside his daughter, resting a hand on her shoulder. "She's right," he said into the mic. "We lost a lot when our jobs disappeared, but we gained something stronger when someone decided to listen. Adrian reminded us that progress isn't about leaving people behind. It's about carrying them forward." He looked over at Adrian. "And for that, we're grateful." Adrian stepped forward slowly, the crowd's applause fading into expectant quiet. "I don't deserve all that," he said, voice steady but warm. "This wasn't mine alone. It belongs to everyone who refused to stop believing they mattered." He looked out over the faces. Workers, engineers, parents, children, all bound by one simple truth. "Years ago, I built systems that made buildings smart, but what I forgot was that the smartest system on Earth is still people working together." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. He gestured to Daniel. "This man lost his job because of my decisions. Today, he leads a team that's rewriting how technology treats people. That's not revenge, that's redemption." And then he looked at Mia, who waved Bright's little arm. "And this girl reminded me that the future isn't something we predict. It's something we build. One heart, one hand, and one bright idea at a time." The applause swelled again, deafening this time. Cameras flashed, not out of scandal but celebration. Councilwoman Alvarez stepped up next, announcing the city's official partnership with North Star Commons. "From this day forward," she said, "Seattle will fund programs modeled after what's been built here. The North Star model will serve as a template for other cities nationwide." Adrian's breath caught. He hadn't expected that announcement, not yet. Rosa laughed through tears. "Looks like you started something you can't stop now." Adrian smiled, overwhelmed. "Good," he said softly. "It's not supposed to stop." That evening, after everyone left, the warehouse fell quiet again. The banners still swayed overhead. Bright blinked softly on a workbench nearby, its small LED pulsing like a heartbeat. Adrian stood alone for a while, gazing up at the rafters, remembering the years he spent climbing ladders built on profit and forgetting what the climb was for. Now, he was standing not above people, but among them. Daniel joined him quietly, hands in his jacket pockets. "You did good today." "We did good," Adrian corrected. Daniel nodded, smiling. "You know, Mia asked if you're her family now. Adrian chuckled softly. And what did you tell her? Daniel paused. I told her maybe you already were. You just hadn't picked a title yet. Adrian looked down, his eyes glinting in the low light. That sounds about right. They stood together in silence, the hum of the city outside blending with the steady rhythm of rain returning on the roof. For the first time in his life, Adrian didn't feel like he was leading anything. He was simply part of something that was finally leading. Him. 6 months later, the Seattle skyline glowed under a softer kind of light. The winter storms had long passed, but North Star Commons still buzzed like the heartbeat of a city learning to care again. Inside the renovated warehouse, laughter and motion filled every corner. The once empty concrete floor had become a living ecosystem of purpose. Children huddled over soldering stations. Parents studied coding modules beside them. Former custodians reviewed AI logs like seasoned analysts. The air smelled faintly of machine oil, coffee, and cinnamon from Rosa's kitchen. Adrian walked the floor slowly, clipboard in hand, smiling to himself. It had been a long time since success felt this human. He passed the robotics lab where Daniel was demonstrating a maintenance drone for a small group of new trainees. The device hovered smoothly above their heads, projecting a small light that traced their faces like a scanner before landing neatly on the table. Now, Daniel said, notice how the system waits for a human override before running diagnostics. That's the people-first protocol. Machines predict, humans decide. Applause followed, mixed with laughter when the drone's camera flashed unexpectedly, capturing a candid photo of the group. Guess it wants to remember us, someone joked. Daniel grinned. So it should. In the kitchen, Rosa handed out steaming bowls of soup to a line of the parents. Nobody leaves here hungry, she told them. Whether it's food, a job, or just a kind word, you take what you need. Adrian leaned on the counter, watching her work. You realize you've built the heart of this place, he said. Rosa smirked. And you built the roof. Let's call it even. They shared a laugh. For all the tension and struggle, there was an ease now, a rhythm that felt earned. Across the room, Mia darted between tables with her usual energy. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, her tiny hands smudged with grease and marker ink. Bright, her beloved robot, now bore a new upgrade, 2 blinking eyes and a small North Star badge on its chest. Look, Mr. Helper, she called to Adrian, waving him over. Bright's part of the club now. Daddy says he's a full-time member. Adrian crouched to her level, inspecting the robot's new badge. Well, Bright's officially an employee. Does he get lunch breaks? She giggled. Only when I do. Daniel joined them, wiping his hands on a rag. You know, she programmed that little bot to wave at every person who walks through the door. Adrian raised an eyebrow. Why? Mia shrugged. Because some people forget they're seen. He felt the words settle deep inside him, gentle, yet profound. Because some people forget they're seen. It was everything his mother had tried to teach him, wrapped in a 5-year-old's voice. By late afternoon, the Commons hosted its first official milestone ceremony. Councilwoman Alvarez and several journalists arrived, cameras rolling as Adrian and Daniel stood on the small stage. Behind them, a banner read, 90% re-employment, 100% hope restored. Adrian stepped up to the microphone, glancing briefly at the crowd, faces of workers who had once stood in unemployment lines, now wearing the quiet confidence of people who had built something that could not be taken away. When we started, Adrian began, I didn't know if we could make this work. But 6 months later, we're not just proving it works. We're proving people are worth betting on. Every single one of you turned loss into leadership. He looked at Daniel. And none of this happens without the people who kept believing when I didn't deserve their faith. The crowd clapped, and Daniel gave him a modest nod. Rosa stepped forward next, handing a certificate to one of the first graduates of the program, a tall man named Samir, who had once been a school janitor. "He's now certified as an AI system safety steward," she announced, "and next week he starts teaching at the very school where he used to sweep floors." The room erupted in applause. Samir lifted his certificate high, beaming. Adrian felt his eyes sting. "This is what redemption looks like," he thought. Later that evening, when the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, Adrian sat on the steps outside the warehouse. The rain had started again, soft, rhythmic, cleansing. Daniel joined him, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. "Rosa says we hit 93% re-employment," Daniel said, "and she's threatening to make cake for everyone who's left." Adrian laughed quietly. "She'll need a bigger oven." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the rain. "You ever think you'd end up here?" Daniel asked. Adrian shook his head. "Not in a million years. I spent most of my career trying to make machines smarter. Turns out I was the one who needed reprogramming." Daniel smiled. "You did all right." Adrian glanced toward the window where Mia's robot still blinked faintly on a workbench. "No," he said softly. "We did all right." A moment passed, and Daniel tilted his head. "You know, she still calls you Mr. Helper." Adrian chuckled. "I think I've grown into it." That Sunday, true to promise, Adrian joined the Riveras again for pancakes. This time, Rosa came too, bringing blueberries from her garden. They crowded around the small table, Daniel flipping pancakes, Mia carefully setting the table. Bright perched beside her, blinking like it understood every word. "Okay," Mia announced, holding a paper star she had drawn. "This one's for you, Mr. Helper. It says, 'Build bright forever.' That's what you always say, right?" Adrian's throat tightened. "That's exactly what my mom used to say," he murmured. Daniel smiled, sliding a plate in front of him. "Guess she'd be proud." Adrian looked around the table, at the laughter, the light, the warmth, and nodded slowly. "I think she already is." Outside, the rain slowed, leaving behind a stillness that felt sacred. In that little kitchen among friends who had once been strangers, Adrian Cole realized something he'd spent a lifetime chasing. Success wasn't about legacy. It was about connection. And this was home. 6 months after the opening ceremony, Seattle had quietly changed. Not through a grand announcement or a new skyline, but through the small, steady pulse of something that began inside an old warehouse. North Star Commons had become a second home for hundreds. The once cold building now thrummed with life. Children's laughter, the steady hum of machines, the rustle of paperwork, and the rhythm of work that finally meant something again. The City Council's workforce report confirmed what few believed possible. Every single worker who lost a job during the automation pilot was now re-employed, not as replacements for machines, but as their human partners. AI systems stewards. And at the heart of it all stood the people who had built it: Daniel, Rosa, Mia, and the man who had once only been known as the distant CEO in a high-rise tower. That morning, Adrian stood by the wide glass window overlooking the Commons floor. His reflection merged with the movement below: rows of workers training, families sharing lunch, a little girl helping another fix a small robot arm. He wasn't wearing his suit today. Just a light jacket, rolled sleeves, and the same prestigious watch he'd once used to time meetings now spattered with paint and machine oil. Rosa appeared beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Your fancy investors ever come down here to see this in person?" He smiled, taking a cup. "A few. One of them cried. Another offered to fund 2 more Commons projects in Portland and Denver." Rosa grinned. "You're building an empire of empathy. Imagine that." He laughed softly. It's a better empire than the one I started with. Down below, Daniel was helping a group of apprentices calibrate solar panels for the roof. Mia ran around with Bright, the robot, whose LED eyes now sparkled with a tiny animation of a smiling star. "Daddy says Bright's going to help power the roof lights," she shouted from below. "We're making sunshine even when it rains." Adrian leaned on the railing, watching her, his heart tightening in quiet gratitude. Later that day, he sat at his desk, this one not in a high-rise office but in a small glass corner of the Commons. Papers covered the surface, blueprints for expansion sites, proposals from other cities, and handwritten thank-you notes from families who had found work again. One envelope, however, stood out. It was small, plain, with crayon on the front. To Mr. Helper. He opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing, stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. At the bottom, written in wobbly letters, "Dear Mr. Helper, thank you for helping my dad build robots, and my heart feel brave. Mia." Adrian exhaled slowly, a small, trembling smile spreading across his face. He set the drawing against the desk lamp where the light made it glow faintly golden. He thought of his mother again, her cracked hands, her gentle laugh. The way she whispered, "Build bright," as if it were both a prayer and a command. He whispered back, "I think I finally did, Mom." The dedication ceremony that evening was small, just family and close staff. The city had officially declared the warehouse block North Star Way. A brass plaque gleamed on the outer wall. In honor of those who kept humanity at the center of progress. Dedicated by the people of Seattle, with gratitude. Adrian stepped back as Daniel placed his arm around Mia. Rosa snapped a photo. "You should be up there too," Daniel said. "You're the reason this exists." Adrian shook his head gently. "No, I just turned the lights back on. You all filled the room." That night, as the group shared one last meal inside the Commons, Mia climbed onto Adrian's lap. Bright balanced between them. "Daddy says you're family now," she said, eyes bright. "We just haven't picked what to call you yet." Adrian smiled softly, his voice catching. "Family sounds just right to me." She nodded solemnly, satisfied, then leaned against him. Bright's little star LED pulsed between them, reflecting in the glass. Outside, the rain began again, gentle, forgiving, alive. Rosa cleared the dishes. Daniel laughed quietly with one of the trainees. The Commons lights glowed against the mist, shining like a beacon for anyone still searching for second chances. Adrian looked around the room, the place where guilt had become growth, where innovation had found its conscience, where love had taken root in the most unexpected soil. He whispered under his breath, not to anyone. Not even to himself, just to the city that had taught him to hope again. AI that keeps people at the center, and hearts that keep the light alive. Bright blinked once as if in agreement. And through the tall windows of North Star Commons, the reflection of one small robot and 3 people standing close looked, for just a moment, like a constellation, like a promise kept.